Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. And this is Lieutenant Colonel Rob Kirkland. And today's episode is really what we would call kind of the lessons that I've learned over the past year working with candidates. And this would be the candidates that have already received their scholarships for this past year and are going to be attending school in the fall of 2022. And so I worked with candidates from Army, Navy, Air Force, and Marines, and was very successful in getting over 95% of candidates scholarships. Through all of this, each year I learn or I get reinforced things that I already knew and they get reinforced again. And then I also sometimes learn new things each year that are important in getting one of these scholarships. So, what I wanted to do with this podcast is just kind of talk to you about these things that I learned, kind of hitting on the high points, giving you my kind of thoughts and hopefully supplementing or reinforcing things that we've already done on previous podcasts. And so a lot of these podcast episodes that I've already cut for you are really evergreen for each year. So uh, we'll make sure that we give updates on new episodes of changes to the scholarship process. And of course, we still have our books and audio, or rather audio and video courses that are on our website that go through and are updated regularly. So please go back to our previous podcast episodes because almost all of that continues to be applicable, as well as these kind of updates that I'm giving you here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the Army ROTC, the Navy ROTC, the Navy ROTC Marine Corps option, and then Air Force, and then give some general observations and then kind of close it out. So first of all, let's talk about Army ROTC first, and that's generally has most of about 50% of the people I work with are concerned with Army ROTC, and that's not surprising given it's uh, has the most scholarships to give out, and is of course the largest service. So when I deal with candidates over this past year with Army ROTC, I continue to get reinforced the importance of the interview and the interview with the professor of military science that heads up the Army ROTC program. So, of the candidates that did not get a scholarship that I worked with, clearly that was the reason why they didn't get a scholarship, was because something happened on the interview that they didn't do well on, or their interviewer did not uh, uh, evaluate them well. And so that is probably of the utmost importance and can make or break an application. And so preparing for this interview, practicing the interview questions that I talk about in blog posts and we have in previous podcast episodes is extremely important in doing well on this interview and getting a scholarship. Because if you don't do well on this interview, you're not going to get an Army ROTC scholarship. And so one of the things, I would say is that, you can control where you do your Army ROTC interview. In other words, you don't have to do it at the closest Army ROTC unit to where you live. You can do it at your number one school or the school that you would like to do Army ROTC at. And so you've really got to take the opportunity to get to know the senior cadre in the program, and particularly the professor of military science, before you do the interview. So that means going to visit the program ahead of time, showing interest, becoming visible, particularly to the colonel that's going to be interviewing you. And so you want to take out as much doubt out as possible that you're going to do well on this interview and get evaluated well. And so again, preparing and making sure that the person interviewing you is aware of who you are through your visits to the program and through your engagements before your interview takes place, whenever you decide to do that interview. So keep in mind that the interview is normally the last thing you do with Army ROTC scholarship. So if there's 3 boards in October, mid-January, and mid-March. So you want to make sure you do your interview no later than the beginning of the month before the board meets, in order to compete on that board. And so in order to visit that program before your interview, you should back off a certain amount of days so that you have visited the program ahead of time, so that when you do your interview, it will be one that the professor of military science will know you and you'll have a successful interview. The second point about Army ROTC is the October board. And October board has remained a very competitive board, meaning that if you really don't have like around a 1400 SAT, it's really, or a 32 ACT, it's really hard to get a scholarship off the October board. They just don't give out a lot of scholarships on that board. I think they gave out like 300 scholarships out of like the 3,000 scholarships that they allocate. So it really wasn't one where it just wasn't. It was very competitive. And so for candidates that don't have a really good profile going into the October board, it makes sense to hold off until January, because for the January board, because on the October board, you get a board score. So what happens is, as part of this process, when you go in front of the board in October for Army ROTC, you get looked at by lieutenant colonels, and they all look at you and give you a rating. So the people generally who compete on this October board, the candidates, are usually highly competitive candidates. And so I think it would be, generally your board score will be lower in October if you don't have really good SAT scores and a really solid packet. So it makes sense for you to hold off and not compete in October and compete on the January board when there's more candidates competing and there's more of a level playing field. So that held up this past year too. So the two things I've said so far is continued importance of the interview, and the October board competitiveness has continued to hold. The final thing that this year was the upgrades to the top 1,000. So what happened is the top 1,000 of the 3,000 some odd candidates get 4-year scholarships, and 2,000 candidates, around 2,000, get 3-year scholarships. And so what happened on the the October board, everybody gets a 4-year scholarship. So that's 300 of the 1,000 4-year scholarships are given out of the October board. That leaves 700 scholarships remaining. So on the January board, there was probably another, I'm estimating here, probably another 500 4-year scholarships given off out of the January board. So there was 200 scholarships that were held back off the January board and given out in March, the March board. And so candidates who got a 3-year scholarship off the January board, that people competing on the March board weren't as qualified as, were upgraded to a 4-year scholarship. So I had several candidates who I work with who got a 3-year scholarship off the January board that were upgraded to 4-year scholarships off the March board. So the lesson learned there is, even if you get a 3-year scholarship off the January board, you still have the possibility of getting your scholarship upgraded off the March board, getting into the top 1,000. So those are the three things for Army: importance of the interview, October board, continued competitiveness, and the upgrades of the scholarships for the top 1,000 off the March board. Okay, so let's transition now to Navy ROTC. And so big thing that I learned about Navy ROTC this past year is that There's boards every month for Navy ROTC, and they begin in October and they end in April. And so the dates for this coming boards are on our blog, and it just type into Google Navy ROTC board dates, and you'll get the board dates coming up for Navy starting this fall. So they have boards about every month. Sometimes they even have boards twice a month, and they start in October and run through April. So one of the big lessons that I've learned this past year is that you should not compete on the Navy ROTC board until you have the best packet possible to compete. And so as you know from previous podcasts or from reading my books, is that uh, having an SAT score that is strong is very, very important. Having a 700 SAT math score is a very, very important aspect to this overall process. So the reason is because Navy ROTC uh, has most of their scholarships are either engineering or hard science. And so they see the SAT math score as the most important part of this application. So getting that 700 or 32 ACT is really important. And I really recommend that you wait and compete on a later board uh, if you don't have those SAT scores around that, or you cannot do any better on your SAT or ACT. What I found with a number of candidates this past year that I worked with is even though they were close to that 700, they competed on an earlier board and they were put on a wait list and waitlisted till April when they came off the wait list and were awarded a scholarship. And so I think the later you can wait and improve your scores as best you can and then compete on that board after you're happy with your SAT or ACT scores, I think you'll be more successful than somebody who competes early with a SAT scores they could have improved. So it's a call that you have to make, but I believe that waiting and improving your packet is better than competing early for Navy ROTC because of the wait list. And the second thing is that your application is not rolled over to the next board. So if you are boarded in October and you don't get the scholarship off the October board, you are put on that wait list and you are then selected in April. So that's another reason to wait and compete when you believe you've got the best packet possible. And the last thing that you normally do before you go in front of the board is to do the ROTC interview with someone in Navy ROTC. So simply the way you can control that is you don't do the interview until you are satisfied that your packet is the best as possible for the board. And you can compete on these boards anytime because they are running once, sometimes twice a month, and you can see the actual board dates if you Google those or go to our ROTC consulting website. And then finally, some of the people that came off the waiting list, particularly later, who got a scholarship late in April, were closed out of their top school. So I had a couple of circumstances where a person couldn't get into their top school and were forced to go to their second or third choice. So that's one of the other advantages to getting a scholarship earlier or maybe waiting to compete, is that you'll be able to get to your top choice school and not have to wait till April off the waiting list where you would then maybe be closed out of your top school. So those were the lessons learned for Navy over the past year. Let's transition to the Marine Corps option. Marine Corps option, the fitness test score was continued to be reinforced. If you don't have a good Marine Corps fitness test score, you're not going to get a scholarship. And so when you initially go for your interview with the Marine Corps, which is usually in the August or September timeframe, you're going to do a fitness test there. And in order to advance to the next level for Marine Corps option to be considered for the scholarship, you have to get over a 200 score on your fitness test. However, you can continue to improve this fitness test throughout the fall and into the spring. So in order to really get this scholarship and to be competitive, you need to continue to improve your score throughout the fall and into the spring, because most candidates are getting selected for a Marine Corps option either off the February board. There's a November board, but you got to be really, really competitive to get something off of the November board. Most candidates are getting selected off the February board, or they're being waitlisted till April. And so if you're not going to be able to get your scholarship till February or as late as April, you should be continuing to try to improve that fitness test score all the way through the fall and into the spring. And what that shows also the Marine Corps people is that you're dedicated, that you really want this scholarship and you're willing to do the test multiple times in order to show um, your attitude, you're not quitting, and that you are dedicated. And I'd say second, regarding the Marines is, or third rather, is or second is to you've got to establish the relationship with your coordinator and the Marines in your local district. Those are the people that are going to have the most influence. Now, the Marine Corps option is the most decentralized selection process. Both Army, Navy, and Air Force are very centralized. So everything's done at the headquarters and everything's selected at the headquarters at the national level. The Marines are different. They select at the district level, and there's like 5 or 6 districts in the Marine Corps for recruiting districts. And so each district has sub-districts, and those sub-districts are usually commanded by Marine Corps captains. These captains advocate at the district level for candidates that they believe would make good officers. So you've got to establish a great relationship with your coordinator, who's that captain, as well as other Marines, like in the recruiting area, so that particularly that captain will advocate for you for a scholarship. I had several candidates this past year who established great relationships. They weren't, they were really good candidates, but maybe they didn't have the best SAT score, or maybe something, but they did great on their physical fitness test, and the captain really loved them and was pulling for them to get a scholarship, and they both got that scholarship in April. So importance of the Marine Corps is the fitness test and establishing the relationships. Finally, let's talk about Air Force. And so one is with the Air Force, is at least what I've seen over the last few years, is that management of the Air Force ROTC scholarship has been suspect in later rounds of the Air Force ROTC scholarship. So traditionally, the Air Force ROTC has 3 boards. They have a board in October, a board in January, and a board in March. And in this past year, they added a board for Space Force, which is sort of like similar to the Marine Corps for the Navy ROTC, but it's a new force that you're probably aware of. But the Air Force is the one that's managing Space Force, at least for ROTC. So there's actually 4 boards for Air Force ROTC. What I've noticed is that you, at least until the Air Force can show me over the past couple of years that they can manage their scholarship allocation better, is that you should compete on the early October board and get that scholarship in October if you can, because you just don't know if the Air Force is going to have the scholarships later for you based on the previous several years that I've been managing Air Force ROTC candidates. So as you know, with the Air Force has 3 types of scholarships. They have a type 1, a type 2, and a type 7. Most of the scholarships are type 7 scholarships, which are in-state tuition for 4 years, or can be converted to a 3-year scholarship starting in the sophomore year at $18,000 a year. About 70% of the scholarships are type 7. Type 2 scholarships, about 20% are $18,000 a year for 4 years. About 10% of the scholarships are known as type 1, which are full 4-year scholarships at any public or private college or university. And so if you would be happy with a type 7 scholarship and you believe you're competitive, meaning that you have a 1300 SAT and you are prepared for your interview, you should strongly consider grabbing that type 7 scholarship off of the October board rather than trying to improve to get that type 2 scholarship. You just don't know how the Air Force is managing things, and you should grab that scholarship when you can grab it. So that was kind of the lessons I've learned from Air Force one of the lessons I learned from Air Force over the past couple of years. Second is the importance of understanding which schools give in-state tuition for out-of-state students. And there's a list of that you can find on our ROTC consulting website if you go to incentives. And it talks about all the schools that consider you an in-state student if you're coming from out of state. And so one example is, say, Florida State. So Florida State, if you live in Idaho and you go to Florida State and you get in there, Florida State considers you an in-state student even though you're from Idaho. So you pay in-state tuition in Florida, and the Type 7 scholarship that pays 4 years in-state tuition would be operable in Florida and would be a full scholarship for Florida. So understanding which state schools consider you an in-state student is really, really important, particularly given that most of your Air Force ROTC scholarships are type 7, and that you want to compete on that early board to get a type 7. The one thing that I failed to mention here about Air Force previously is that if you get a type 7 scholarship off the October board, you're done competing for Air Force ROTC. So you're not going to be considered later for a type 2 or a type 1 scholarship. So once you get that type 7, you're done. So you got to be happy with that type 7 if you think you're going to get that off the October board. The final thing I would say with Air Force is the power of the upgrades. And there was a recent blog post I did on this, but I had several candidates who were really, really competitive that got into Ivy League schools, Notre Dame, MIT. And so if you have a type 2 or a type 7 scholarship for Air Force, that will be automatically be upgraded to a type 1 if you get into certain schools. And that's for like Ivy Leagues, Duke, Notre Dame, Johns Hopkins, MIT, Stanford, Rice, and there's several other ones. And there's also a list for Space Force. So be aware of those upgrades, and that, if you get that type 2 or type 7 and are a really competitive candidate and can get into a really good school, you can really leverage that upgrade in order to be able to have your school paid for on a type 1 scholarship. One other thing about Air Force ROTC is the Space Force, and Space Force was sort of implemented this past year for Air Force ROTC. It's new. They ran this board. The jury's out about Space Force as far as what is involved in this, what new lieutenants are going to do in Space Force. But if you compete for a Space Force scholarship, it's important to understand that if you accept a Space Force scholarship, that you have to go into the Space Force, that you don't have the option of going into the Air Force. So that's important, because if you take a Space Force scholarship, then you go into Air Force ROTC, and then a year into Air Force ROTC, you make the decision that, I would really like to fly a jet for the Air Force. Based on what I know right now, you wouldn't be able to move to the Air Force. You'd have to stay in Space Force. So the lesson learned there is if you accept that Space Force scholarship, you better be sure that that's what you want, Space Force. Now, if you accept an Air Force ROTC scholarship, you can go into Space Force. So that gives you that kind of flexibility. So if you get that Space Force and they offer you that Space Force scholarship and you decide to compete, just read the fine print and understand that you're likely not going to be able to go into the Air Force, that you got to stay in Space Force. And so finally, in general, two schools that really stood out to me this past year were the Citadel and Texas A&M. And these are what are known as senior military colleges. And if you take a look and you type in ROTC scholarship and either type in Citadel or Texas A&M, you'll see that they are offering room and board scholarships to all ROTC cadets and midshipmen. And the Citadel in particular is making up for people on 3-year scholarships or Air Force ROTC scholarships that are Type 7 or Type 2. They're picking up all of the tuition. Army ROTC 3-year scholarships, they pick up the first-year tuition, and they're giving room and board. So the Citadel is really a standout, and Texas A&M has upped their game with room and board. So those are two big institutions that have really come to the table in helping ROTC cadets and midshipmen. I had a candidate who got a Army ROTC 3-year scholarship from the Midwest, and they are now going to be going to the Citadel, and their Citadel is picking up the first-year tuition and is kicking in 4 years of room and board. So this is a candidate on a 3-year scholarship who everything is being paid for the 4 years. So if you really want to go to the Citadel, it's an awesome thing that they're doing. And Texas A&M, like a number of other schools, are providing room and board to help out ROTC candidates. So those are kind of two institutions over the past year that have really been standouts for me. So hopefully this didn't go too fast for you here today. I had a lot on my mind regarding kind of what's happened over the past year. We're getting ready to, we're accepting candidates here for ROTC's clients for this next year. And, we'd love to work with you and have you be as successful as the candidates we've worked with in previous years. I'd also encourage you to check out the online courses we have. If you don't opt to consult with us, those courses are available on our website and are excellent ways to get completely oriented into the requirements for ROTC. So I hope you found this episode helpful. Sorry I've been away for so long, but I felt like I just wanted to get this episode out to talk to you more about kind of what I learned over the past year. And, I'll try to crank out some more podcasts here in the coming months. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.